I would like to share my personal overview of the situation in Spain in relation to the penetration of gender identity ideology in schools, and starting with a brief chronology of my own experience as an indicator of how things have happened and how has this ideology and all the transgender rhetoric in general been operating in all areas and stages of education. So this story, of course, will resonate to many of you, although we are not that far as countries like Canada, but we are currently on that very same path. If nothing can't be done to stop the approval of the pack of 3 laws that are being proposed by the government through the Ministry of Equality, all of which contain and consolidate gender identity ideology and transgenderism, but most importantly, our pending task in education, and something that has caught us by surprise, is the need to reverse, not to prevent the approval, but to reverse all the acts and protocols that have already been passed during these last 5 years without notice, going completely unnoticed, in a vast majority of the autonomous communities and cities in regional parliaments. The Spanish Education Act is a common framework within 17 within which 17 autonomous communities and 2 autonomous cities in North Africa designed their education acts, and they adapt to specific competencies. So between 2014 and 2020, 14 autonomous communities and 1 of the cities in Northern Africa approved bills and protocols intended to update co-education. I'm highlighting this in commas and also in red, because this is the vocabulary. To update co-education by introducing new concepts and expanding rights. The result of this is that gender identity ideology has become a very important part of all the protocols for schools. And education is not just another area. As I said, it went completely unnoticed, even for researchers like me, who've been 25 years doing research in education, inequalities and diversity in schools, doing ethnography and participating in all conferences, committees, counseling with the government, local authorities, national authorities, regional authorities. Never came up as a problem, never was mentioned by anyone. And we found out that many, 14 out of 17 autonomous communities had passed all these laws. So education already has this in force. And it is the most relevant area of those that have been affected by similar changes in all the regions. 3 kinds of legislations have been passed concerning anti-discrimination, health, and education. But it's the only social institution that provides direct access to all the future citizens. So it is not any other area of society. There wasn't any notice, as I said, and there wasn't any public debate at all from between 2014 through 2020. And I think that none of us, in fact, not myself, were aware of these protocols. And it doesn't matter which party was in the government in any of the regions, because all these legislation have been passed by conservatives, social democrats, and nationalists in power, with wide support from all the parties. The only thing is that the only issue that might have been of some public interest at some point in 2017 was this campaign that was launched by Chrysalis, which is by large the most important activist group and lobbyist group, transgender lobbyist group, in Navarra, one of the autonomous regions in the north, to make trans children visible and let them know that they are not alone. And they produced this, and there were signs in Navarra, in the Basque Country, and they said there are girls with penis and boys with vulva. And about that, what we already knew and how we came to know about this campaign was the reaction of the far right that launched these buses. There are some buses, there are the signs, I'm going to read that. Domestic violence, it's not gender-based violence, it's domestic violence. It's against men. Boys have penises, girls have vulva. Don't let yourself be wrong, and and the like. So the orange and blue bus is launched by this far-right party. Well, it's by an organization which is close to the far-right party Vox, that has obtained 52 seats in the last election in the national parliament. We're objecting to gender ideology, but also against all gender-based legislation against violence, etc. And they were intending to travel around Spain. They were banned because on the grounds that they were homophobic, not that they were called transphobic buses, but they were banned on the grounds that they were homophobic. And in January 2020, so everything has happened very, very fast, very quickly, they started to try to travel around Spain again with the buses. And there's this green bus that you can see launched by a popular progressive late night show conductor, making fun of Vox and of himself with the sentence, "Gender identity is not chosen. Don't let others choose for you." So it's something innate. It's in fact supporting this underlying idea of an innate gender identity. But we didn't, apart from that, we were not really aware of what had been going on in schools. We were obsessed with what the government, we were starting to struggle against what the government wants to pass, the pack of legislation that they want to pass that have to do with adults, and in one point, eliminating the filter of minors to just self-ID and change, and undergo changes, not only legal changes, but also medical changes, etc. But what are these protocols saying that schools and teachers must do? Exactly the same that my previous colleague, Charlotte, presented for Canada. So teachers need to be trained in gender diversity. They need to be able to help students interpret their discomfort and what's going on so that they can accompany them through transition if they wish to do so. They are encouraged and given power to initiate an investigation into possible child abuse when parents or adults in charge may oppose or may demand psychological or medical diagnosis. Students have the right to change their name in all the school documents, and also to be treated according to their felt sex. That's an expression that you find in all the documents. It's the felt, the innate is what you feel you are inside you. And in all the school settings, teachers are encouraged not to organize activities that might entail separation of sexes, students by sex, because it will be considered discriminatory, including sports, for example, and also use school facilities and adapt them to the demands of new rights acknowledged to students, raise awareness about gender diversity, gender identity, and transgender students and their rights in the school's curriculums, and do the same with the families. So it's always the same thing. And what is important here is that in 2019, we still could see there was this coexistence of contradictory approaches to the meaning of co-education. Some examples from my autonomous community, Catalonia, that was one that started with all this legislation. In 2019, March 8, we had these two kind of different messages, from apron to cloak on your left-hand side, and where equality is said to be a collective struggle that empowers all girls and women. But then on the right, you see the image that was chosen by the Department of Education of the regional government, and diversity taking over equality, that nothing to do. And both images are trying to appeal to co-education as a way. So this is the website, the official website of the Department of Education. And on the left, of course, it's in Catalan, but I'm going to tell you what it is about. It's quite interestingly, you have the menu on your left-hand side, where the protocols on the menu only have one protocol. It's the one related to transgender students, how to act with them in schools. And at the bottom, you'll see novetats, which means news. And there you can find a protocol against gender-based violence, and that's the new. So the new thing is what applies to girls being harassed by boys, which is by large the most important harassment you can find in schools. On the right hand side, you can find a page once within the menu on the subsection gender stereotypes and roles, where they say, for example, Western societies have an obsession with classification. Other culture, of course, recognize lots of genders and promote freedom of identification, etc. As a social anthropology, I have to say that this is not true, although there are lots of press articles saying it is. And there's a short film that I'm not going to pass, but you can see that sex and gender are mixed up, so you can imagine what the film is about. Let's say what is done from what are proposals from that addressed different stages of education. This is an example of a course I attended that is given by a very important town hall, local council in Catalonia, and was given freely, of course, during the lockdown for families and teachers of early childhood provisions and preschool years. Preschool years in Spain are school-based. Okay, so students very early start going to school. So it's provisions, not in school, and preschool in school. And the title was Growing Up Free, Feminist Rearing for a Childhood Free of Sexism. But all the rationale was how can parents provide their children with more than two options. So it is about inclusive education from a feminist perspective, apparently, but then it's about really actually what is gender diversity, exploring and expressing your own gender as a child, how you can help your child explore and express their gender identity, reviewing what gender options do we present our children with. It's the identity market, open, and expanding your gender options. And the books that were recommended, one of them, I found the English edition, Chasing Rainbows, Exploring Gender Fluid Parenting Practices, which is a Swedish publication and has a Catalan and Spanish version. And the other one, it's 100 Possibilities Instead of 2. And you can see that you could see that parents were so shocked that they were limiting their children's options, something they wouldn't do because, of course, they would be harming and traditional and conservative. They wanted to expand. So let's see what happens in primary education. We have undergone lots of changes in the education laws. Now we are about to change the law again to adapt it to new needs, new realities. And Comisiones Obreras, which is a union I'm a member of, and is the largest union gathering teachers and teaching professionals, produced this new material intended for primary school students and teachers, which is called the Mermel's Strange World. And they say, together with the Department of Education and all the members, more than 10,000 teachers received, during the lockdown, received this material so that they can adapt them to their classes and to train themselves. These materials are based on prescriptions of the education laws in force. Diversity in a wide sense is totally related to sexualities, genders, bodies, ideologies, individual freedoms, changing aspects according to the society or culture in which we grew up. So that's the intention, and understanding sex and gender beyond man-woman binarism. And I'd like you to read very briefly, just to read a paragraph of Mermel. What is this about? Once upon a time, at the beginning of stories, Mermel did not have hair or a body shape, skin color, nor a size. At the beginning, Mermel did not have, only was. Then Mermel, after considering several options, decided to have curly hair, wear glasses, have a fat body, and dark skin color. Finally, Mermel decided not to be a girl or a boy. Mermel has to face all kinds of social barriers, keeps being insulted in every option taken, etc. Then a village is described where everyone is diverse and lives by diverse options, but no one is above anyone else. And the village and the people, which in Spanish is exactly the same word, el pueblo, we the people, as in we the people. Mermel, I'm avoiding pronouns, arrives into such special village and there is a free house, but has to find the key, which Mermel can only do with the help of all the diverse kids in the village. So finally, it is about finding your own box, which is unique and different from anyone else's. Who would object to that? So the disguise of inclusion of diversity is conveying the gender identity ideology from a very early age, and to my knowledge, there hasn't been any public and systematic reaction to that. This is another material created by the association Chrysalis, the same that launched this campaign in 2017 that caused the reaction of the far right with the buses. And they provide these materials. Everything is very recent, 2019, 2020. And this is the example of resources for teachers and parents, how to explain Berta's behavior and preferences and find out that she is Daniel, not that she believes is Daniel, that she is Daniel and never was Berta. Of course, Berta is a gender non-conforming girl. She's a free, modern, progressive girl, but everything she does, she doesn't care when she loses one of her earrings. That's one of the examples provided in the list. Then the parents see the teacher has already also observed this behavior, and finally they decide that they have found out, they have helped Berta found out who he really is, etc. All this is absolutely widespread and in all schools. Secondary education. We are, again, in collaboration between the largest Spanish activist federation of organizations standing for lesbian, gay, transsexual, and bisexual rights, in collaboration again with the education branch of the union, have produced, this is a little older, 2018, but now they have updated it, a comic book intended for secondary school students and teachers, intending to bring the reality of transsexual people to secondary school students, answering to eventual doubts and giving tools and keys to work about these issues in class. And there is this complaint, very interestingly, existing laws about sexual and affective diversity in schools are not being developed, despite the fact that some of them were approved even 5 years ago. So, and they of course say that LGTB, being LGTB is the second cause of bullying after prejudice against being overweight. And Paul, this trans teenager, which is described like this, brings sexual and affective diversity closer to school. So through the inclusion of the expert. What happens in university? Can we see how are being teachers trained? How are being educators educated in university? Well, I was in charge of the Equality Union because I was a vice chancellor in my university, and that entailed this duty, this section. And in 2014, we were fighting against sexist, male-centered ideas in science and against inequities in higher education. You can see one of the signs we protested with well, I think it's self-explaining what happens on your right-hand side. It was issued by the Department of Science of the government, apparently to promote science among girls in the STEM scheme. And we were fighting this. And then in 2016, the protocol against sexual harassment and gender-based harassment, there in that protocol, the reference to women is already lacking. Although gender is understood and could be understood as an indirect mention of it, sexual orientation is clear, but then gender identity appears as a category. You'll see that the sign, the logo, the feminist logo was in 2014, the one we already know, and now we see 3 colors in the new logo. And then at the beginning of the last school year, in 2019-2020, the first seminar, international seminar or international seminar on education and gender, a new group at the university, was devoted to queer education. So it is also among feminists, among feminist scholars, it has been gaining ground. But the last important thing I want to share, because I think it's the summary of all this penetration, is that in 2020, the Same Equality Unit recommends these co-education materials elaborated by a Basque activist group. But what I want to say is that it doesn't matter, it is activist or the university, they coincide and they feed each other, in fact, a guide to work for effective sexual and gender diversity. And although they talk all the time about co-education is the way, co-education is the way, co-education, if you look at your right-hand side, you'll see the summary of everything we're talking about. So it is beyond binarism and heteronormativity, and you see gender identity, expression, sex, and sexual orientation, where it lies in your body, and where do you find the middle of it? The surprising thing is that in sexual orientation, you don't have bisexual in the middle. I don't know why. Maybe they forgot to introduce that, but that would have been something to expect. But it's a summary. This is recommended by the university. So whom we can we appeal asking for rationality? That's the July 2020 campaign of the regional government. That's called Obvious Rights. And obvious right number 11 is a boy looking at a mirror and choosing a dress, a girl's dress, to go for a walk with mom. And the strange thing is that number 27 of these obvious rights is the picture of a woman. Say you have the right to be a woman and live freely. Of course, I mean, it's in all the laws. So all these ideas that have to do with how you behave with the others, with the right to be as individuals. So that's an obvious right. Who has opposed all these? Feminists, feminist organizations, and very recently during the last months. And we have to thank the lockdown. Maybe one of the positive things that we can get from it is that it has enabled close contact with many feminists that have come to know this and come to discover what was going on in schools after opposing the laws that are going to be passed concerning mostly adults, although they also include minors' rights. And one, I'm going to mention just three. One of them is an incredible work that has been taken by the feminist sisters in Front Abolicionista del País Valencià, abolitionists from Valencia, and which analyzed this incredibly huge guide called Our Bodies, Our Rights. And you see the stamp that says it is machista, sexist. Well, machista is more than sexist, male-centered sexism. It's not educational. It's not based on equality. It has neoliberal and patriarchal ideas and stands for sexual exploitation, and which is regarded as ordinary work, promotes pornography and naturalizes rape culture when intending to be progressive about that as different kinds of pornography, etc. Stands for surrogacy, mixes up sex and gender, and lacks scientific grounding. So it is a very important work, and it has, I mean, it's been public and it's been talked about, it's in the press. And the other one, I was invited, in fact, before Christmas to join the Alliance Against the Erasure of Women, to take care and to join the team focusing on education. And that's how I found out what had been going on during the previous 5 years. And the Ministry of Equality sponsored and published this guide that I have to say was elaborated by colleagues, anthropologists, in one of the Spanish universities, and apparently is a guide for teacher training, informal and non-formal education about gender diversity and gender identity and gender expression. And one of the exercises is find out in a word soup, in a word search, find out name calling that has been usual to insult lesbians. I don't know what is funny about that, but that's the exercise you find it. So we reported that contents to the ministry, to the media, and we demanded immediate withdrawal of the guide. Of course, we coincide with what the colleagues in Valencia had found out when analyzing the other guide. So yeah, and during the same period, the law to protect childhood and adolescence against violence, which is called the Rhodes Bill for reasons that it's not necessary to mention now. Also, feminist colleagues from Mujeres por la Abolición, Women for Abolition of Prostitution, of Gender, etc. in Article 28 focuses on education and child-centered violence in schools. And there's no specific action to tackle sexual harassment and cyber harassment against girls, although in sex-based violence, girls are the targets while boys and men are the perpetrators. There's lacking complete feminist approach, etc. And that's also, that has been approved by the cabinet, so it's going to the parliament. Finally, again, let's look at international organizations. Well, it's impossible. It's there too. As we know, not only the World Health Organization, but also, for example, Save the Children. Save the Children issued this report, Gender Identity, a Right for Children. And they say children are not being taken into account by adults when they still debate whether a kid is a boy or a girl. Access to treatment with hormones or surgery are a right to be acknowledged, and I'm really, really scared about that, because they have a lot of power to modify the Convention of the Rights of the Child. So they may be in the way to introduce this new right in the Convention. And you see again all this ideology. If we want to respect the feelings of trans children, that of course exist, and avoid both their stigmatization and the school harassment it entails, as well as the self-rejection of what every person really is. Okay, so we cannot count on Save the Children. And finally, materials created by Spanish groups of experts that are really have a good curriculum in working in co-education have received one of the 2 prizes given by the UNESCO to excellent school materials for peace and women's and girls, with the advancement of women and girls. And of course, you can find gender identity as part of identities that need to be included in sexual affective education today. And I'm not saying that all the guide follows these ideas or is based on these ideas, but of course these ideas are taken for granted right now. So what can be done? What can be done? I don't know, but I'm sure that there's 2 priorities. The first priority is to stop and prevent the enormous and often irreversible harm that's being done to children and youth and their families with this invented diagnosis. We thought that we had enough with the introduction of ADHD as the medicalization of children and youth. And now, of course, we're even beyond that. But in parallel, the most challenging action, I think, and the most arduous work is that we need to unmask and expose the anti-scientific lies of the gender identity ideology in schools and universities, because that's the very place where knowledge is created and is taught and is reproduced that are completely at risk. And this is, I think, the even harder work than the first priority, because it's, of course, science is always changing, but it cannot be replaced by beliefs instigated by what I think to be neoliberal induction of consumption of our own bodies through their commodification in the identity market. That's the way I try to word it, let's say. And how can we do that? We need to do that counting on strong international feminist movement with a holistic approach. Education is very self-referred, and always educators do not read other scientists or are not aware of other things that are going on outside education. And education is always something that is added to the public concerns. And no, it has to be the center of it, because it is the center of reproduction. I said, it's the only access to all future citizens. And if it is reproduced there, it will be very, very difficult to reverse that.